So we'll get started. If you guys are my AP Bio kids, hopefully yesterday went well for you. I didn't hear about a lot of problems technologically. And then also they did do the tweak that they had for submissions as far as being able to email if you had any sort of technological glitches. So hopefully no tech issues. Hopefully you're done. And it's really nice to be past that point where you're concerned about getting ready for a high stakes test in order to be able to take care of your credit. And so hopefully you're feeling the relief that comes from being done. And we, at this point for our course, get to discuss what the remainder of the course is going to look like and how we protect your grades, how we take care of the wrap up for this class, how do we get through the 1970s to present. So we actually do justice to the course, not just stop around the Vietnam War. But we do so also with the idea that you've done your hard work for the year. The AP test really demanded a lot as far as preparation for essay testing and whatever. So as you take a look at what we're doing for the remainder of the course, we need to talk about the ways that we protect your grades. And then also we need to talk about how we wrap up our content and take care of things over the next few weeks. We've got the rest of this week. Next week, we got a 4-day week. The following week is supposed to be finals, but there are no final exams in this class for this year. And so what we'll be doing is instead, we'll just be giving you a chance to take a look at different time periods, different content, with a chance to build up your test grade category so that we can make that better, because that's the one that has the most outsized impact on your grade. It's the one that we were talking about spending time after the AP test ramping up anyways. This year, we're starting a week later since they pushed back the AP test date a week later. And so let me run you through what it is that we'll be doing today to build you into that point. So let me, first of all, show you a couple things. So these are the guidelines that we have been taking a look at when it comes to the grading that'll be taking place for this upcoming year. And what we'll be doing is we will be taking a grading stance that is going to be having a grade in this class of either an A, a B, a P for passing, or an I for incomplete if you are at an NC at the point that we wrap up our instruction. If you are in that group of getting a C or a D, that P will replace that grade. And so that will be the situation we're looking at as far as your grades. So there'll be no differentiation between a C or a D. For us also, if you receive an I, that means that next year you will be contacted by the school to develop a plan to turn that I into a credit. And so our best situation right now is to make sure that you do not receive an NC/I for this course as we move forward. So what I want to remind you of is first of all, your syllabus. And with your syllabus, we talked about a number of different things with your grading. First of all, we talked about the fact that we throw out one test per quarter. I've already done that for third quarter. I'll be doing the same for fourth. And that'll allow you to see a bump taking place in your test grades. Secondarily, our principals at the start of our distance learning set up the standard that if there were technological issues or whatever, there were not going to be late penalties for missing work. And so for my students who are getting NCs in this class, typically the problem that those kids are facing is the fact that they're not completing work. And if that's your situation, you still have time to make that up. So if that is something that you are finding yourself in the situation of, I will be contacting you to discuss that situation to help improve your situation if that's something that you're interested in doing. I'd also like to remind you, though, of the deal that we set out at the beginning of the course. If you turn in all of your work and it meets the standards that I am looking for, which means you're doing authentically your own work, you're not lifting from internet sources, you're not copying from other kids, you are not skipping stuff and ignoring work outside of the one set of notes and one test that I throw out per quarter, I am going to be able to bend your grade upwards if you were able to pass the AP test that you took last Friday. Remember that if you get a 3 on the AP test, your semester grades go up 1 letter grade. If you get a 4 or a 5 and you've done all the work that I was describing for you, including the stuff that we'll be doing as we round out the end of this course, I'll bend your grade upwards to an A. So there are a lot of outs that are available for you as far as being able to improve your grade and improve your grade substantially at this point. And so if you are somebody who has worries about that, the first thing I want to highlight for you is the days of really rigorous testing are now finished. That was what we were building up for Friday. In our class also, we would have done a lot more essay writing and testing to build up to that point. With the controls of being in the classroom, obviously being at home, you saw the College Board take extreme measures to try to make sure that cheating wasn't taking place by giving you a DBQ format. And so as a result, with the DBQ format, that is an authentic assessment that I am certain is going to give them a feel for how much history you know. That's not something that we're going to be recreating during the time that we have left together. So instead, what I'll be doing to bolster your test grade category is I'm going to be doing something different this year. We'll be using video instruction to teach you about the time period, the time periods that we still need to cover using a website called Edpuzzle. And the Edpuzzles I'll be sharing with you have quizzes built into them that should not be difficult. If you're paying attention to the video, if you have completed your reading for the time period, these quizzes should be really easy, and they should be a chance for you to actually improve your test score points. Sophia, I saw your question about the practice tests that we took. Those will be going into the gradebook today, along with a lot of missing work. So yesterday I was going through my regular classes to get caught up on their grading. Today is the day that I start going back through messages that have been sent to me from your classes and inputting grades that we've had over the past week and a half when I was trying to ramp up for the AP test. So you should see a really good approximation today about what your grades look like as I am working my way through. So let me show you what you'll be working on. No problem, Sophia. Let me show you what we'll be working on then. Going to this document right here. I'm going to give you a couple links. This link is to join the class that I've assembled in Edpuzzle. And Edpuzzle, if you've not used it, I'm pretty certain that most kids have, but Edpuzzle is a video streaming site that allows you to watch a video that I've chosen for you with questions that you'll be answering. And then it creates a grading site for me. So I'm able to take a look and see, did you complete the video? And I wanted to watch it 100% through. Did you complete the questions that were going along with it? And hopefully then this will give me a chance to help you to improve your grade in the test category, but also give you a chance to get a taste of each of the time periods that we've not studied deeply at this point. You are living in a time period where the 1970s and forward is having a huge impact on where we are currently. And so when we take a look at the 1970s, this is a period where we see the presidency change. And so one of the things that's problematic about stopping where we did at the Vietnam War is the fact that we're going to find that from Franklin Roosevelt's time period forward, the presidency is going to change in such a way that the president's going to get more and more powerful. The question you and I get to wrestle with is that good? In this scheme of checks and balances, you saw Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe. They were all really worried about doing things that could be seen as making the presidency too powerful. You then saw Andrew Jackson come along, and he wasn't super worried about that as a big issue for him. But even he was living under constraints that Franklin Roosevelt and Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, they blew past. During their time periods, the presidency goes from being a few people in the White House to hundreds of people in the bureaucracy and the cabinets that we build up. And in particular, during the Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon time periods, we see the growth of what's called the imperial presidency. The imperial presidency is a presidency where you see the presidency become much more secretive, much more willing to not tell the truth to the American people. You see the presidency taking on more powers to try to affect change. And you'll see that with Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon, where they start building things like Medicare, Medicaid, public television. Richard Nixon builds the Environmental Protection Agency. There's a lot of things the presidency starts doing to really get more involved in people's lives. But then also there's some really suspicious stuff that's going on with the presidents during this time period where they're willing to engage in activities that would be seen as illegal if they were held to the same standards that regular citizens were. For Lyndon Johnson, he had his intelligence agencies doing things like infiltrating groups like the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War protesters, the students movement, and whatever, with a program that he called COINTEL Pro, which is the counterintelligence program, where we actually had people infiltrating those groups, spying on them, and doing all sorts of things that would be seen as an abuse of power. For Lyndon Johnson, though, he is able to escape the presidency without receiving much scrutiny about that. Richard Nixon, though, famously is going to do the same. He is going to be caught getting involved in the Watergate scandal. And what's going to hurt both of those presidents is the credibility gap that they're creating with Vietnam, where they keep lying about how the war is going. Lyndon Johnson keeps telling America the war is just about to get better. We're about to turn the corner. Things are about to get good. And then Tet happens. And Richard Nixon claimed that we were doing Vietnamization. And then it happened that he was secretly bombing and invading Cambodia, which led a lot of people to wonder, can you trust the president, whether Republican or Democrat? Are there any boundaries to their power? And that's what we'll be exploring when we take a look at the early 1970s. This topic is incredibly appropriate because you just saw our president go through an impeachment process. And a number of decades later, you saw it play out very differently. So unlike Richard Nixon, who was forced to resign by the people in his own party who are worried about the impact that he's having on their reelection chances, you saw Donald Trump be able to escape impeachment and not even have to face witnesses because the Republicans in the Senate were able to surround him and get on the same team with him. We're going to find also that since that time period, if you've been watching the news, the president currently has been firing inspector generals whose job it is to investigate corruption inside the White House. And we've now fired 4 of them over the past month and a half. And so the question is, what is the impact that the imperial presidency has as we move from the period of Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon forward? And is that a good place? Is it a good place to have a president who is that powerful, who is able to avoid investigation and scrutiny? Because that is very much the situation that we are contemplating currently. The other thing to keep in mind, though, is this is going to be a time period where we economically change our viewpoints as far as what's going on with economics. You learned way back when we were studying during the Great Depression, you learned about Keynesian economics. And so when we learned about Keynesian economics, you learned that when the economy goes through ups and downs, liberals from the time of FDR forward believed in the idea that when the economy goes bad, you increase government spending and you go into debt with the idea that you then can stimulate the economy and make the economy better. The dilemma that we have, though, and this is something that I would like you to contemplate as we move also into today's world, is we're going to discover that with Keynesian economics, the thing that we were told to counter Keynesian economics is when the economy gets better, you should then cut government spending, deal with our debt problem. And what we've seen over the past few decades is we've actually fallen in love. Of course, Chelsea, you have a good day. I'm recording right now. I will talk to you through the recording. You'll find that during the period of the 1940s, 50s, 60s, Americans fall in love with the idea of deficit spending on government programs, both when times are bad and when times are good. So what we're going to see is during the 1960s, there's going to be a problem that flares, and that problem that flares up is going to create the modern conservative movement. Because during the good times of the 1960s, if we take a look at the curve was pretty good during the 1960s. And we talked in class about 2 different types of spending. We talked about guns and we talked about butter. We talked about guns being military programs and butter being domestic programs. And we actually stimulated the economy like crazy throughout the 1960s by spending money on both the Great Society and the Vietnam War. And it did stimulate the economy. We did go into debt, though, and we did start printing a lot of money, kind of like what you saw going on over the past decade. President Trump was very certain that he was going to win the next election, and he still might, because of the fact that the economy was going so well. But the economy was booming because he really ramped up our military spending. He also deregulated like crazy, but he also was spending way more money than we had. About $1 trillion more per year was being spent on our economy than we were taking in taxes. So our debt and deficit kept getting bigger. The problem that you have is that these tools right here, according to Keynesian economics, those are supposed to be used here when the economy is bad. And the problem is if you've got a lot of government spending here, you can create a bubble that can pop, or it can lose its impact and it could cause problems. And one of those problems is what you saw during the 1930s with Germany. They went into a period of hyperinflation. In Germany, because they started printing so much money, they then started watching their prices skyrocket. Their economy crashed. The Great Depression then made it worse. And that economic dip became hard because the problem that you have is if you do all of this deficit spending here and the economy goes bad, you can't really use this to fix this because you've already spent your cash. And your bigger problem that you have is we're going to find in the 1970s, we do have an economic dip. So in the 1970s, the boom that we've had since the time of the Great Depression, we see some slipping going on with that. Our factories are older and they're not keeping up with like the factories that we rebuilt in other parts of the world. And in fact, Americans are getting mad that our Marshall Plan helped to build factories in Germany and Japan that then helped them to become economically booming. And at the same time, our factories got old. We also had unions in the factories that made our workers really expensive compared to workers in other parts of the world who would work for less. And so we see our economy take a dip. And one of the problems that we have is we've already been stimulating the economy like crazy. When the economy takes a dip, there isn't a lot of stimulus we can do. We're already in a war in Vietnam. We are already created the Great Society and Social Security. But then the bigger problem, and this is the thing that I'd like you to be examining when you are watching today and tomorrow, we're going to be learning over the next couple days about something called stagflation. Now, if you're like, Hohenstein, why are we learning about this stuff now? Why are we not just done? We took the AP test. Why aren't we good? Your economy just went into a crash right now. There are people who are pointing out that our unemployment rate right now is what it was during the Great Depression. Many people are pointing out, well, you know, it happened because of an epidemic, and when the epidemic is gone, things are going to get better. That's trusting that we get a vaccine. A vaccine typically takes between 18 months to 2 years. There are some people who are doing a lot of happy talk about getting a vaccine in the next few months, which is something that would be amazing. It would beat every previous record ever. So our economy just took a dip like it did in the 1970s. We are doing tons of stimulus to try to help out with that economic shock. And the problem is we've got experience with this from the past. Stagflation was when the economy took a hit and then all of a sudden prices skyrocketed. And the thing that went wrong in the 1970s is there were countries in the Middle East who understood how dependent we were on oil. So what they did is they decided to cut off our oil supplies. And when they cut off our oil supplies, the price of oil then went through the roof. And as you learn about from the 1940s, 50s, 60s, all the things that make America America depends on cheap oil. Our suburbs depend on cheap oil. Tons of our products, like the plastic that you have around your house and other sorts of products, depend on cheap oil. And when the price of oil goes up, everything that uses oil goes up in price. And the dilemma that we have is, what do you do about that? Like, if you have stagflation, the economy crashes. The old system was, let's use an inflationary policy to pump a bunch of money in here for stimulus. But the question that we have is, if the government starts spending more money and going deeper into debt after doing it here, and the economy doesn't get better, all of that money getting pumped in the system will make prices go even higher. And if that happens, where you've got a bunch of unemployed people and the price of everything gets super expensive, that would be the recipe for really terrible things happening inside the United States. We're going to have two oil shocks. One is going to happen in the early 1970s after America again defends Israel from an attack from all of its neighbors. And so following the Yom Kippur War, we are going to have OPEC shut down our oil. We're going to have another one in the late 1970s because in the 50s, Eisenhower helped to lead a coup against the leader of Iran. So if you've noticed, Iran hates us quite a bit. We're going to be supporting a dictator in Iran called the Shah of Iran. When he tries to flee to America to get treatment at our Mayo Clinic here in Minnesota for his cancer, we'll have another oil shock. Those two oil shocks in the early and late 70s is going to cause economic hardships. The change that's going to happen then is we're going to have a return to the thinking that we had during the time of Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover. So if you've been wondering, how is it that from the time period that we had in the 1920s, we had Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover, and then Republicans became much more moderate. But if you notice nowadays, our Republicans now have returned to that very conservative viewpoint of laissez-faire, pro-business, Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover. It's during the 70s that this happens. So if you're somebody who's like, Hohenstein, I get it. Keynesian economics, you do deficit spending here to stimulate, then here the economy gets better and you pay off your debts. We're going to find that replaced by a guy named Milton Friedman. And Milton Friedman's economics, and this is what Republicans believe in nowadays, is when the economy goes bad, what they believe is you should cut taxes and cut government spending. And what they say is that if the government is stepping in, they're interfering with the free market. So during the 1970s, the argument becomes that FDR's New Deal made things worse by dragging out the Depression longer. Now, they ignore a lot of stuff that Hoover was doing at the end of his presidency, recognizing that the economy wasn't getting better. But for many conservatives of the 70s, they argued that we should really focus on the Smoot-Hawley tariff that cut down foreign trade, and we should instead focus on becoming more limited government in our thinking. And so they claim that the way to make the economy better is during bad times, cut taxes and cut government spending. And in good times, cut taxes, cut government spending. And they argued that government was not the solution to our problems. Government was the problem. And so they're going to argue that if you cut taxes, the government then needs to shrink, and we could then have more laissez-faire economics that would help our economy to do better without having government interference. What we'll find then is we're about to enter into a period where the Republican Party will become more conservative than Nixon, than Eisenhower. They're very much following the lead of Barry Goldwater from 1964, who believed in a much more conservative Republican Party. And that's very much where Ronald Reagan is going to be coming from. So we'll be taking a look at him later on this week. But for you guys, what I want you to consider is this is not going to be a lot of heavy lifting. What you are going to find today, this is your Ed puzzle assignment that I've got right here. It is a video, and I've got a couple of video series that I'll be using throughout the rest of the time that we're together. This video is titled The Century. It was created about 15 years ago. It's a really good series to give you just an overview of what's happening during the time period in conjunction with what you've been doing with your reading. So what you should be doing is this. So over the next couple weeks, remember, chapter 40 and 41 notes are due. If you've submitted them already, that's great. Make sure that they're authentically yours. Please do not turn in stuff that's lifted from the internet. Otherwise, you and I will be having problems about academic dishonesty, and I don't want to have that be the last thing that I remember you for. Remember, you get to throw out one chapter's worth of notes per quarter. If you've been doing all your work throughout the course of the year and you want to skip the notes for chapter 40, 41, whichever of the ones you want to choose, that's absolutely up to you. It just helps you to understand, especially if you're curious why our politics are as divided as they are right now. Having those chapters understood will help you out quite a bit if you are curious about that. The video that we're going to be watching today is early 1970s. It's going to be showing you the Richard Nixon presidency, both the highs and the lows. And so for Richard Nixon, he is a tricky individual. And when you're watching him today, he is somebody who is very conservative in his worldview, especially his anti-communism, which makes it incredibly shocking when he brings in détente, a period of peace, and where he recognizes, and this is where Richard Nixon gets seen as being incredibly brilliant, he recognizes that we should move away from monolithic communism. He argues that our argument in the country that you'll hear nowadays, where there are some people who, if they hear anything liberal, they'll announce it's creeping communism. Nixon will point out that that's not helpful, even though he helped out with that with the HUAC. He is going to point out then that Russia and China have never liked each other historically, and the only reason why they're united is the enemy of their enemy is their friend. So during the Vietnam War, he comes up with the brilliant idea of flying to China to visit with them, flying to Russia to see if he can split those two countries away from each other, and if he can peel those two countries away from Vietnam. Domestically, he is going to be doing things that a lot of modern day Republicans never would do when it comes to civil rights, the environment, but he's also packing the court system full of conservatives to try to move the country in a more conservative direction. And so even though he's a more moderate Republican than the Republicans nowadays, he is planting the seeds for us to move in a much more conservative direction, especially with his actions with the court system. So that's what I'm going to be wanting you to take a look at is for Richard Nixon. He very much signals where we are currently. And what I really want you to understand as we move forward is you'll notice that nowadays it's really hard to get stuff done. In the old days, though, they had a little bit of an easier time. And the reason why is if you think about the political spectrum during this time period, our parties have not fully divided yet. They will be soon. So in the 1980s and beyond, we'll find ourselves becoming more politically partisan. But during this time period, if you were a Republican, Republicans ranged from really conservative Republicans like out in the western part of the United States who believed in rugged individualism. That ranged all the way over to the far left-hand side where you had progressive Republicans, especially from the northeastern part of the United States, who were still influenced by Teddy Roosevelt and Taft and progressivism. They all called themselves Republicans. You also had during this time period Democrats, very liberal Democrats influenced by FDR and Lyndon Johnson, ranging all the way over to conservative Democrats. And these are your Southern Democrats who are much more conservative than the Republicans that are from the Northeast, but they're still Democrats and they can't stomach the idea of voting Republican. From the period of Richard Nixon through Ronald Reagan, though, you're going to see some shifting. Many of these Southern Democrats are going to realize they're not Democrats anymore. They're now Republicans. And many of these Northeastern Republicans are going to realize they're not Republicans anymore. They become Democrats. And our problem is when our parties become hyper partisan, where everybody in the Democrats is thinking the same way, everybody in the Republicans are thinking the same way, that's where compromise starts to break down. So up until this point, like with the civil rights movement, you could get Lyndon Johnson passing the Civil Rights Act, and he was able to get that done because Southern Democrats didn't support him. Northern Republicans were willing to compromise with him, and Republicans and Democrats were able to vote on the same things. Now with our political ideologies being pretty well aligned with the parties, you're now finding that there's very little compromise taking place. And we're not certain where that takes us in the future. And that's kind of the seeds that we're planting with Richard Nixon. So when it comes to these ed puzzles, what I want to highlight for you is this. I'm going to be expecting this to be done by tomorrow sometime. I'll be grading it the day afterwards. And so the day after these are due is when I'll be doing the grading. If you're somebody who is sending me emails about stuff that you turned in that you'd like to have added to the grade book, here's the caveat that I need to give to you. Grading everybody's late work when there is no penalty for late work is making all of your teachers' lives miserable. And the reason why is we get to plow through all of these old assignments and try to track down this assignment or that assignment, and it is painstakingly difficult when it comes to time. If you could please, if you are somebody who wants to protect your grade and you want to make sure it reflects in the grade book quickly, get your stuff done on time so that when I grade it in one batch, it's in the grade book. Because as some of you guys are discovering, if you're turning in stuff late, it could take a while for that to get done because I'm still grading on time stuff for the rest of the classes too. So while it may not seem like a big deal to you, it is logistically really difficult to keep all of that stuff straight while also getting plans done and whatever. So if you're willing to help me out, get your work done on time, and then you won't have the hassles with your parents and with your grades. And if you do have any questions, first of all, if you've sent me a message about missing stuff, you should be able to see that registering in the gradebook soon. And if you want to stay in touch with me, you absolutely can. But hopefully this addresses what we're doing for the rest of the semester, how we're protecting your grades, and how you can do best in order to keep yourself safe. Well, we also give you a really quick and hopefully not too difficult review of the time periods that are still remaining. So at this point, I'm going to turn you loose unless you've got questions. And if you do have questions, feel free to throw them into the chat area or else on mic. But otherwise, you guys have a great rest of the day. Enjoy the relaxation that comes from being done with your AP tests. And I look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow at 8 a.m.